Hey everybody, welcome back to the JPU Show. I'm one of your co-hosts and one of the co-founders of the Jax Podcasters United group. My name is Badr, and I'm joined by my right-hand woman, the big brain, Blythe from Blythe. What up, Blythe? How you doing?
Hi, hello, or hello.
Signature trademark coming on a shirt near you. Today we are talking about Apple iOS 18 and the new updates that will be coming to Apple Podcasts and how they may impact you as a podcaster and as a listener of said podcast. I do have a link. I'll have a link to the story that we'll be referencing in the show notes. Big shout outs to 9to5mac.com, who had a really good article about all the different iOS updates coming to Apple Podcasts. Life, today I want to hear what's going to be the most useful to you as a podcaster and as a listener. But I'm going to go ahead and share just a couple of the main big updates. All right, just rapid fire quick. So first and foremost, iOS 18 will be available, obviously, as a free software update. It'll be actually happening the same time that this episode drops, so we get some timeliness there. They're adding chapter markers in the playback scrubber. We're getting a sharing timestamp link, so you can share an episode at a specific timestamp point. We're getting faster search results, which that means a lot to me. Faster search results and Apple Podcasts. Oh God, it's here. It's finally here. And last, well, I guess not last but not least, we're also getting linked chapters in the episode descriptions, which means that if you write a timestamp in your episode description, those will show up as hyperlinks where you as a listener can click it and the player will go directly to that timestamp. So you don't need to create chapter markers.
Such an Apple thing to do. Drop features that have been available for so long.
All right. Am I missing anything? Link chapters and episode descriptions. Yeah, I think those are the big main ones. A couple months ago, Apple released the transcription feature. And I want to say also the other big kind of update to Apple Podcasts that had people talking was the ability to listen to said shows in iTunes and web version as well. So it would carry over. Like if I'm listening on my phone and I was 31 minutes in, I think it carries over as long as I'm logged into the same Apple account on my other devices, if I'm to understand that correctly. So just named a bunch of the features at a high level. Is there anything that catches your eye as a podcaster that you're excited about, or maybe as a listener that you're looking forward to?
No.
Wow.
I just look at this list and I'm like, really why? Quick. Okay, first of all, I don't use Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
I use Overcast like a normal person. I have thought about switching, maybe trying another third-party app. But the reason that I even have a third-party app is because Apple has fumbled the bag, the podcast bag. They have had domination of podcasting for so long. And we're just now getting chapter markers. We're just now getting the ability to search. Like that, to me, is crazy. Am I?
No, and hearing you say it like that, I'm kind of like, I don't know why I'm this excited about things that already exist in Overcast, which I do use. And I think I've mentioned this on the show. I use Overcast for some shows and Spotify for others because I'm a psychopath and I don't know why I don't house everything, but I kind of like the different experiences.
Well, the listening experience in Spotify is atrocious. I hate listening to podcasts in there. I would much prefer to just keep it all in one app and have a consistent user experience. This sounds like Apple is getting more towards some of those mainstream features that have been available for years. And so I guess it's just sort of typical Apple fashion to, put a lot of excitement around things that they should have already had. Like I did do a little bit of a search. So I did, I re-downloaded for this show. I re-downloaded Apple Podcasts. And I do have to commend you on your podcast art. It shows up very well in Apple Podcasts. I don't know if you can see this, but for folks who may just be listening, they do
episode 437, by the way, the Shortbox Podcast, Tom Scioli
But the
interview.
way that it shows up, so if you open up the podcast app, there's I have 4 in my up next feature, and so of course it shows my podcast. So that's pretty much the only reason why I downloaded it, was to just see what my podcast looks like. And it shows some other episodes, and they look good. They look really good inside of the platform. Is it enough to make me start listening exclusively on Apple Podcasts? No. I'm still going to listen in Overcast.
There was a
I
point in
don't.
time, I'm sorry, there was a point in time when I first got into, I mean, I think it's safe to say there was a point in time for many of us that Apple Podcasts was the most dominant, maybe like only podcast player that a lot of us knew. You know, like it
Yeah,
was in the name
they were
Apple
the only
Podcasts.
one.
So there was a point where that was my main one. I maybe switched over to Overcast and Spotify maybe just a couple of years ago. And you're right, it is baffling to see just how long it's taken Apple Podcasts to catch up on certain features, certain offerings. I know my biggest gripe for the longest time was just how slow it was. It felt like pulling teeth trying to search for an episode or a podcast. And, you know, you were always, it felt like when you opened the app, you were just bombarded with things that just, you're like, none of this applies to me. I just want to find my shows.
And I did a search too, because you had mentioned something about search and that it used to take a long time. Is that?
Well, the issue was that you would have to enter the whole, and that is an update that they're applying here, is that you don't have to, I guess, all right, what they have here is faster search results. Previously, you would need to enter a complete search query before getting any results. Now it has like smart search. You know, as you're typing it out, it'll try to auto guess. Before, if you didn't enter it correctly, like if I put the short box instead of 3 words, or if I made it all into one, it wouldn't pull up the podcast. So the search function for the longest time left much to be desired because you had to be very picky of your wording and how you spelled it, and then it would still go really slow, you know?
I did a search for logistics just to see how how my podcast would show up. And if you see me making like a stank face, as I'm looking at podcasts that haven't published an episode in months, but they're ranking above mine. So I have a little bit of a problem with that. But I do like the autofill that they show you, because if you listen to our SEO for podcasters, you will know the SEO trick that if you go to Google and you have to go it in incognito mode. But if you go and you search and you do sort of the ABC trick method, which is where, so for this example, logistics, space the letter A, space the letter B, space the letter C. You do that, you go through the whole alphabet to see what they're going to recommend. And because you want to check that out, because if they're adding whatever letters or whatever words to the autofill, that's enough data from that company, from Apple or from Google, to be able to see like, okay, well, that phrase is being used a lot, enough for them to mention it in the autofill. So I do see some opportunities possibly in order to check out, keyword research and that kind of thing inside of Apple. I do think that is interesting. So that I probably will keep the Apple Podcast app active only because of that. Because when I did a search for logistics, then it will show at the top. It'll say, top results. It'll say episodes. It will say shows. So it could be a good use case to do a little, keyword research or to check out your competition, which is why I was making a little bit of a stink face.
I want to add the other feature that piques my interest, or maybe, I've been waiting for Apple Podcasts to adopt, is the ability to just list out the timestamps in the episode description, which I'm definitely guilty of. I know Buzzsprout has a dedicated place to make chapter markers, and they'll handle the rest. But sometimes that's an extra step that I don't want to take, and I just want to put it right there in the episode description where I'm confident people will read it. Now in iOS 18, you can do that, and it'll hyperlink to, if you click that, it'll create a hyperlink, and if you click it, it'll move the playhead directly there. I don't think it creates the chapter scrubbers like the previous update I mentioned. That one is if you make dedicated chapter markers and you designate them as chapter markers, the playhead has little notches. So it's a graphic representation of, hey, here's one chapter, here's a topic, here's a topic. I don't think that'll be carried over from the timestamps in the episode description just yet. As someone,
I was going to say, did you want to finish your point?
No, actually, that was it. I think as someone that writes occasionally timestamps in the show notes, I've kind of gravitated or moved away from doing even that to this point. Now I'm kind of like, hey, look, I'm going to list everything that we kind of talk about. And, I think my episodes are short enough to where I don't necessarily need to. They're an hour, an hour 15 at the most, where it's just more work sometimes to try to find all those timestamps.
Especially
Granted,
if it's just if it's just one guest, like what do you really need
exactly.
timestamps for? If it's a show like I host a show with a good girlfriend of mine, and we cover like 6 topics in a 2-hour show. That to me makes sense of where to put
For sure.
timestamps.
Yeah.
What I do wish is that Apple would just automate this. Like if you're working on sort of this Apple intelligence and things like that, bake that into podcasts. So then that way we don't have to do chapter markers. And maybe you make the chapter markers custom to the user that is listening. And so you're showing them the relevant content that they want to see. That to me would be true Apple intelligence.
I like that.
One thing I did want to point out is when I was doing a search, I don't know if you've noticed this, but they have a tab called channels off to the side. And apparently
that's their subscription method, right?
No, from what I'm gathering from it is that you can have, say, it's almost like the pod roll that you were looking at with Buzzsprout just released a new feature where you can showcase your favorite podcast or relevant podcast in your pod roll, which is kind of like your MySpace, like top 8 or top friends list. This kind of feels like that because there is one company in logistics and supply chain that has several shows, and they are able to put all of their shows under this channel. So they have, it's called Supply Chain Now. They have a channel and they have 9 shows, each with their own RSS feed in that channel. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm
that
looking at
might
it.
be a good play from like an SEO perspective, from just a community building perspective. Maybe even a good thing for like JPU. I mean, it would probably be way too many podcasts in our channel. If we were to make a JPU channel, it would be like 400 podcasts. Yeah. We got a lot of podcasters.
That's how deep the Jacksonville podcast scene rolls. Really quick, I went ahead and typed in comic books in Apple Podcasts. Just I was curious to see like where mine obviously ranks or pops up. And my show pops up at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I thought it was going to be a lot better. I think I miscounted. It shows up number 12, so not that much scrolling. And I got to say, I pat myself on the back, but the artwork looks pretty good.
It does look really good, and I like that they support the custom artwork. I think it looks it looks like a social network. Like that, when I'm in here, it kind of looks like Pinteresty.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not enough to make me switch. It's enough to keep it on my phone, not delete the app, and use it for research purposes. But I Overcast, they just released their new app, so it's much faster, and it does. I have all of my shows sort of systematized and categorized. I have different playlists. Like I have a sports playlist, I have a logistics playlist, I have a business playlist. And it's already set up there. So until someone makes a superior app that I can migrate all of that information over to, I'm staying with Overcast.
I think these updates are impressive, but kind of to the point of the joke that you made earlier, it always sometimes does feel like iOS is giving us
too little too late
features. Yeah, a little too late. And to your point, I've already got a flow. I've already got a thing with Overcast and Spotify. I guess I got a process or whatever you want to call it, a habit that these updates aren't enough to make me switch over. Now, I want to ask, what is? I guess I want to ask, like, is there a feature that they can roll out on the app that would make you switch over? But the more I think about it, it would have to, for me, it'd have to be really radical. I think their next major update would have to be something that radically changes the way we interact with podcasters, or some sort of feature. I don't know. Like, I'm thinking, I don't know if they have the speed option yet on the playback. I think they do. I don't know if they do. But, like small things like that, it's still missing. And you're like, well, they haven't even caught up to some of their competitors. In order for me to switch over to like do that work of like resubscribing and setting up my queues, it would have to be something drastically different. And I don't know if a facelift would be the answer to that, or some feature that I haven't even thought of. Apple Podcasts is inject the podcast right into my brain.
I think Apple is just, unfortunately, it is one of those companies that ever since its founder died, Steve Jobs, they have been, I think, just under management mode. They don't release really new products anymore. They give us features that are, 5+ years old that other apps have had. The latest new product that they launched was the Apple Vision Pro. It's an expensive paperweight now for a lot of folks who spent $3,500 or whatever that cost was on that VR system. I just think they're kind of like Disney. They're a little creatively bankrupt, and picking out the best features from other places and trying to bring them in house. They are working on Apple Intelligence, which they're partnering with ChatGPT, so it's yet to be determined on if that's Apple's. Are you still going to have private data, privacy? Is that still going to be their mantra, especially if you partner with a company like ChatGPT? I would just like to see some innovation from them. I would like to see, but then it's also like I'm saying this, and I'm also thinking, well, an algorithm is probably next for Apple Podcasts. Do I want an algorithm? I don't think I do. But then it's probably better for podcast discoverability that they do have an algorithm. So I'm kind of torn on that. I think I think making life easier for podcasters with chapter markers and things like that go a long way. I think their analytics has drastically improved over the last year even. I don't know though. I don't know what would make me go and use Apple Podcasts again. I don't. Podcasts are just so simple from a programming perspective, from a user interface perspective. I don't know how much you could optimize that experience.
I think I fully agree with you from a listener perspective. As a podcaster, looking at these features and thinking like, okay, to someone out there, which, I mean, I say someone out there, but if I'm being honest, I just pulled up my stats on Buzzsprout and I'm looking at the apps and devices. Apple Podcasts accounts for 40% of my downloads. That's for the last 5 episodes. I'm going to look at last 10 episodes. Still 40%. So, from a podcaster perspective, these features might seem like old news to me, but for the 40% of people that listen to my show, these are some solid updates. Being able to share episodes. What'd you find? It's like 100% for you, and you over here
60%. I take back everything I just said.
Don't bite the hand that feeds you, lady. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I think we underestimate just how much of a stronghold Apple Podcast still has. I know that it feels like every month, you'll see a headline where Spotify knocks Apple Podcasts out or YouTube does. But I think it says something that it's always about Apple Podcasts being knocked down. And yeah, do I wish that it was a little more exciting updates? Sure. But the fact that 40% of my downloads come from Apple Podcasts, I say, hey, if they're just now catching up and getting these awesome features, more power to them. I think from a podcaster perspective, being able to add timestamps, chapters, if you have a long running show, for your show to pop up a little faster in the search results, for people to share specific timestamps. Those are all great features as someone that wants their podcast to be listened to and shared more. So more power to them. I think, but I'm in the same boat as you. Not enough for me to switch from the apps I currently use. With that being said, do you think we're at a good stopping point, or do you got anything else to share?
No, I got nothing. Apple gives me 60% of plays. I've said enough.
I'm actually going to have to hard edit this episode, what you're saying, to make it very pro iOS 18. But let's turn the tables on our listeners. What do you think about the updates for iOS 18? Are they enough to maybe convert you if you're not using Apple Podcasts as your main podcast player? Or is it enough to convert you to using them? What do you think from a podcaster perspective? Any updates that speak to you that you're excited about? We would love to hear from you, whether you leave a comment in the YouTube show notes or comment section, or shoot us some fan mail via our Buzzsprout, via the link in our episode show notes. However you can get to us, all right? Let us know that we're not talking into the void. We would love to hear from you guys. And that is what we got for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys take care of yourselves. I don't want to say keep podcasting, but I got to figure out a good tagline.
Keep creating.
Keep creating. I like that. We'll workshop that. But until next time, be well, take care. Thanks for hanging out with us. I bid you adieu. Peace.